This afternoon, I am in Boulder, Colorado, speaking with Susan Nevelow Mart, who since July of 2011 has been an associate professor and the director of the William A. Wise Law Library here at the University of Colorado School of Law. Susan, it is our custom to sort of begin these sessions by learning a little bit about you as a person in addition to being a colleague. So could you tell us a little bit about your life, perhaps not only now, but when you were younger?
So I could.
Good.
So I am from California.
California.
And I consider myself sort of by California.
Mm-hmm.
I was born in San Francisco, but I really grew up in Southern California. So I am conversant with both parts. If they split up, I don't know which side I'll choose.
Well, if they put that train in, you can go back and forth real fast.
Yep.
But they got to figure out how to pay for that.
But I figure where you went to high school is really sort of the defining characteristic of your young life, and I went to high school in Southern California. So I'm a Valley girl. I graduated from Van Nuys High School.
Uh-huh.
And then I went to school a little bit and took a hiatus from the normal track.
Uh-huh.
I think it's fair to say that I was a hippie.
Well, why not?
And
I mean, that was at one time very much in.
That was what people were.
Especially in California, from what I hear.
So I did a lot of different things. I owned a restaurant. I drove a taxi.
Wow.
And I traveled a lot and all over the world and made my living designing clothes from local textiles and selling them, either in Europe or back in the States. And that was a 10-year hiatus before I went back to school.
That is probably something that an awful lot of people who moved on in life age-wise would have loved to have been able to do when they were still young enough to both be able to do it and get away with it.
I know. I say that I took my retirement as I went along.
Well, why not? If you get a retirement at the end of work, you can do whatever you want to get.
Exactly. But then I did, of course, go back to school. It was actually driving a cab that sort of made me realize that perhaps I needed to complete my education.
It's probably a tough way to earn a living.
It was actually a pretty easy way to earn a living, but it doesn't have a lot of mobility. You just do it and then, but I mean, I was very young when I did it, and I got a lot of, let's just say I made good tips.
Yeah. Well, you probably at this point could decide with a lot of background that most people don't have if you wanted to drive for Uber or Lyft or one of those outfits these days.
Yeah, I don't want to do that. I did that already. That's a dangerous job.
I would be a little nervous about some of the people that jump into the car.
So I didn't say that it was Beverly Hills Cab.
Well, maybe for good reason. Maybe it wasn't.
Yeah, I don't recall having a problem with anyone actually, and I drove in the daytime, so it was. And LA is not a cab town, shall we say? It's a kind of funny place to drive a cab. Everyone has a car. So you take tourists to the airport. And
I noticed all those cars were on the road with us the other day.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
And so, then I went back to school, and from there, I think my trajectory was a little more normal. I got a bachelor's degree, and then a law degree, and then much, much later a library degree.
Now you earned all those at schools in California. Could you
Yep.
mention where each one came
So
from?
I got my undergraduate degree in anthropology from the University of California at Santa Cruz. And I was actually studying archaeology. In America, that's part of anthropology and not part of classics.
Oh.
And I went for an education abroad here to Egypt, ostensibly to go on a dig, which never happened, but I did get to spend a year in Egypt. And then I went to law school and practiced law. I mean, I thought that was my career, right?
Why else would one go to law school?
Right,
I suppose
exactly.
most people, they figure they're going to become lawyers.
Yeah, I did become a lawyer, it was fun. I had a great career. I liked it, but there was a point at which I wanted to change.
Yeah. In law school, you were back in the Bay Area, as I recall.
Yep.
In University of California at Berkeley.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Where I had a really good time. I think one of the benefits of being an older student is that you see the point,
Mm-hmm.
and it was every time I went back to school, it was easier for me to engage. Really, I think as an undergrad, when I first started, I didn't know what I wanted to do. When I went back, it was a whole different ball game.
Mm-hmm.
It was just more fun when I was a little bit older.
Yeah. It's got to be tough to go back to school because it's a regimented life in some ways that people don't fully realize. I mean, you have your papers to do and your studies and tests to take and fast.
I'm not sure that I would agree with that, actually. I think that school is a pretty unregimented life.
In some ways it's a lot of flexibility, but you still have to regiment yourself enough to get the work done.
Yeah, at the end you have to actually perform, but you do. I mean, I have to say, after going through all those schools, when I actually graduated law school and had to go to work at a regular job, I was like, really? I don't get the summer off?
Well,
I have to wear a suit every day?
Well, in those days you did too, and now a lot of the lawyers are more casual.
But it was not casual when I started. In fact, even wearing pantsuits was like forbidden.
Well, I remember my first job as a reference librarian. I was still in library school, and I came to a French language class that I took in the summer to learn enough to pass the graduate school requirement for reading knowledge of a foreign language. And I was always dressed in a coat and tie, and my future wife noted me. She was there. She said that she noticed me because I was the only guy dressed up. But in those days, we were expected to dress in business attire as it was at that era.
Absolutely.
And since I wasn't going to change to run across to the next building, take this French class, I just stayed dressed.
So when I started, it was very formal.
Yeah. Well, you were in the practice for, 17 years?
Yep.
So you made it more than just a casual go at it.
I did. It was definitely a career. I mean, I think I did it long enough to say that.
Yeah. That's a pretty good career by itself. I mean,
it was.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Any particular aspects of the practice that sort of
So I was a civil litigator. I did mostly business litigation, what I call business divorce, which is the dissolution of small partnerships and corporations, which is every bit as acrimonious.
I imagine everyone's fighting over everything.
Everything. It takes kind of the same kind of psychological skills to disentangle people as family law does. I did a lot of contract work, and I mean that not in the sense of working for other attorneys, but in the sense of drafting contracts. So I was on the board of the American Association of General Contractors, and we did form contracts for the industry all the time. So I think, sort of, it's hard to say, like, is there an exciting case? So I think the first contract I ever reviewed was the construction contract for one of George Lucas's buildings in Marin County, which became a huge film complex. And I think the most sort of newsworthy thing I did was related to pro bono work that I did. I feel very strongly, I still do, that lawyers should do pro bono work. We have knowledge that other people do not, and we should use it not just to benefit ourselves, but to benefit society. So one of my pro bono things that I did was to help elderly people who had problems with fiduciary abuse. And I was on a referral board, and I got a case that I think no one else wanted to take. It was kind of politically charged, and it was in an area where I don't normally practice, and so I was not worried about offending a judge, for example. So I agreed to represent the wife in a case that became a TV movie, you know, one of those things like, it was about a doctor in the East Bay who was getting Alzheimer's. He had the very, very beginning symptoms of Alzheimer's. And I think his mom, I'm not sure, one of his parents had a very, had Alzheimer's, and he knew from personal experience and medical experience how awful that was. So he went off to meet with Dr. Kevorkian.
Oh, all right.
And members of his family who were, I guess, more religious than he was, flipped out, kidnapped him, took him to Florida.
Oh, boy.
And there was a huge lawsuit about getting him back to California. And that got resolved. And then his wife wanted the court to allow her husband to come back and live at home with her. Part of the return to California involved this doctor staying with one of his daughters. The court apparently felt that the wife was involved in the Kevorkian caper, and
a little too interested in the results.
And that was the part that nobody would touch. So I represented the wife in an effort to get the husband back home with her, and actually I was successful.
Maybe we should mention for our viewers who may not know about Dr. Kevorkian, he was promoting death with dignity.
Death with dignity.
Phraseology, and in those days that was not legal anyplace.
I don't think it was legal anywhere.
And I think he served time actually for that, because he was involved in a termination of life on television. It was some of his video.
So, but then, as now, this is a conversation that by no means is complete and actually invokes strong feelings on both sides.
Oh, very much.
But
we have it in our state now, and it was the controversy when it was being enacted.
Colorado just passed it.
Oregon has it as well.
But the truth of the matter is that most people who want that information, even in the Kevorkian days, don't do anything about it.
Yeah.
They want to know they have some control, but they don't actually end their lives. It never got to that. I mean, the gentleman involved died a natural death with his family, and never did anything.
But it's sort of, whatever works for them is
exactly.
Works for them.
But I did have my, I think, 10 seconds on a news program.
You're right. You were picked up one of those hot potatoes in the case.
Yeah, exactly.
However you want to describe it.
Exactly.
Well, you've talked about the practice. Now, then you decided to go to library school, and you haven't mentioned where you got that. You were practicing in the Bay Area?
I was practicing in the Bay Area, and I was probably suffering from a little bit of what I call social worker burnout. I mean, being a lawyer has a lot of therapy elements involved.
Sounds like you were trying to hold an awful lot of hands in these cases, and they were slapping on everybody.
So I was at a women's medical presentation with a Bay Area librarian, Mary Statz from Farrell, Braun, and Martell. And one of the pieces of information that we were given was that if you were a healthy woman of 50, you would live to be 100. And I just turned to Mary and said, I can't be a lawyer for another 50 years. I just can't. And she started extolling the virtues of being a law librarian. And I had actually thought about it a little bit earlier, but when I looked into it, Berkeley School had already changed from being a library school to being an information school, and it was full-time, 2 years, no exemptions, and you needed to know, I can't remember which 2 programming languages you needed to know in order to enroll. So I was going to have to quit all working completely and go back to school in order to go back to school, and I went, no, I'm not doing that. So she said, well, why don't you try San Jose State? I didn't know there was this library program at San Jose State.
Did you know there was a San Jose State even?
I did, in fact, know there was a San Jose State. But so I looked into it. At that time, the program was about 40, 60 online versus in person. And they still had a thing where you could just sort of sign up for a class or 2 without actually formally enrolling. I don't know if they do that anymore. So I signed up for a class. I think 2 weeks later I was in my first library class, which was something like Introduction to Library Themes or something like that. And then I thought, well, if I'm really thinking about this, I better get a job in a library and see if I like it.
Well, it seems reasonable.
Yeah, so I went to a couple of library agencies in the Bay Area, and one of them found me a job as a part-time librarian at the Joint Library of the California Supreme Court in the First Appellate District. And that was my first library job. I did that for a year, I think, while I transitioned to being a slightly more full-time student at San Jose State.
So to date this, that would be around 2001, if I've
Yes.
my notes. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, that
You were
sounds,
there, what, about a year?
yeah, that sounds about right. And then I decided that I better get a full-time job.
Pays the bills better.
It does pay the bills better. It definitely does.
Yeah.
And so I had been watching while Hastings, which was literally across the street from the California Judicial Center, they kept advertising for a reference librarian, and I was like, well, I only have 3 classes. Well, I only have 5 classes. Well, I only have 7 classes. And finally, they advertised the same position again, and I just went over and I said, would you accept an application from someone who hasn't finished library school? And I was lucky because at that time, that was sort of the dot-com boom, and librarians were being snatched up left and right for fabulous salaries to create ontologies for local startup companies. It was a boom time to be a librarian. Somebody figured out, oh, those people can classify stuff. That's important.
Useful knowledge.
Oh yeah, very useful knowledge. So they said, yeah, sure, you can throw your hat into the ring. And I interviewed there, and I didn't get the job.
Oh.
They gave it to someone, and I can't really blame them, who had both degrees and some experience. And that person came out with his fiance to rent a house in San Francisco and told them, this really isn't going to work for me. You actually can't live here on the salary
Turned
you're
out
paying.
to be a tad more expensive.
Yeah,
for rent.
and so I already had housing is basically why I got my first job.
Well, that's part of the reality.
It is part of the reality.
This person they hired, if he'd been a good librarian, would have done a little research before coming out there for the interview.
You would
and should have
think.
picked some of that up.
But it was the early days of the internet.
Yeah.
So,
Relatively speaking.
well, it wasn't as easy as it is now to do that, in a calculator where you say where you live now and how much you make and what that would buy you if you moved to, say, Nashville.
And then you can go farther and see if there's anything in that rate, in
Exactly.
that bracket.
Exactly.
Potentially.
So I lucked out. They called me and said, our hire fell through. Would you come work for us?
Well,
And that
no
was
shame in that.
that was just a terrific job.
Well, you were there again until 2007, so about 5 years. Is that?
No, I was there till I came here. I was there till 2011.
Oh, okay. That's wrong.
Yeah, so that was my job before I got here.
So you were the faculty services librarian is the title I've seen for you.
That was my second title. I was a reference
you were
librarian.
Moved up then from reference to
Yeah,
faculty
and then I
services.
became faculty services librarian, and
You were also an adjunct professor, so
yes,
you must
so-
have taught something. They don't generally hand those out at the last.
yeah. So I think that Faye Jones had been at Hastings until just before I got there.
All right.
And she had taught advanced legal research, but when she left, no one was teaching it. So after I got there and finished my library degree, I said, you know, I would like to start it up again. So I started teaching a class first called Advanced Legal Research, and then I went back to the faculty and said, my students are always shocked when I ask them to think, and so I want to change the name of the class to Advanced Legal Research and Analysis, so that they will know that they have to actually read the law and think about it in order to do research. And so they agreed. So I taught a 3-unit class called Advanced Legal Research and Analysis.
So when briefing a colleague or a judge or somebody, you have to have a little more analysis.
Exactly. You can't
For some reason.
you can't do research about nothing. You know, you have to do research about something, and that means you have to think about whatever that is. It is not about pushing buttons and opening books. It's about thinking.
Well, that makes it all harder, but it's
But
more useful.
that's why they pay lawyers the big bucks, right?
So you were at Hastings then. The 2007 may have been your promotion because
I think
saw
that's
it someplace.
probably
I see now in 2011 and further in my notes that I'm looking at.
So I
when
think
you-
that's when I changed titles to faculty services librarian.
So you decided to move a little bit farther east, about 1,000 miles or thereabouts, to the Rocky Mountain West. And, here you are in Boulder, Colorado now as the director here at the University of Colorado.
In this beautiful space.
And it's a beautiful setting. My son is traveling with me. People who watched any of this group of recordings I make on this trip will hear mention of that. And we were in Denver this morning, and we came in yesterday actually. The mountains are a lot farther away from you there. Here they're nice
They're
up
right
close.
here. We are literally where the prairie ends.
And yet you're not very far from Denver.
Nope. It's interesting. This is a very unusual physical environment. We have everything here.
It's a wonderful campus. I mean, very accessible to,
one
visitors.
It was one of the draws for me. I mean, Hastings is a standalone law school, and so it isn't connected to a wider university.
But it's much more of a urban setting too in San Francisco.
Well, that was okay. I'm kind of urban.
That was fine. You were urban.
I've had to get used to not being so urban. But it is really, really nice to have the entire university here, and I take advantage of it. I like to reach out and collaborate with people in other places and do other things on campus besides just stay in the law school.
Well, could we talk a little bit more now about your last years while you've been here and some of the things you've done and accomplished, and then maybe are anticipating as your next, what you're going to do with the library over the next, well, maybe 1, 2, 3 years, however long out you want to guess.
It's always hard to go out more than a couple of years without getting
really
into,
true. We were told to come out 5-year plannings, and after about 1 or 2 years, it was just never land.
So one of the standard questions is, what is the future of law libraries?
Well, I do ask that sometimes.
It's hard to say, but so there were a few things that I really wanted to accomplish when I got here that I thought Colorado was really ready for. And one was more teaching, and the other one was more, well, I should say 3. The second one was more involvement in the law school itself, between the law library and the law school. And
so you're speaking in terms of not just yourself.
No, but everyone.
Everybody.
Everybody.
That is a model I see when I visit, become quite prevalent.
Yes, I think that's where the need is, and you know, it hasn't, in my opinion, become easier to do legal research with the advent of all of the online availability of
actually
things.
More difficult.
It's
I mean, everybody can do the basic stuff, presumably. So your librarians step in when it's not the basic stuff.
Yes. So we've expanded the number of courses that we teach. We've created a first-year course, which is currently an elective, although high on my list of things to do is to make it part of the first-year curriculum. And I think we have 8 advanced legal research classes. We've increased the number of courses that we will do, you know, 1 or 2 or 3 hour presentations in. We've increased the committee work that librarians do for the law school. We've sort of increased the ability of the librarians to participate more fully in the life of the law school, because I think it helps to understand if you sort of know what's going on in the law school. And so that's
the library too. I mean, to the faculty.
It does.
It is useful in
does.
different ways than they had anticipated.
So, so I think both of those things go under making the library more visible and more responsive. And then the other thing that I really wanted to do was to digitize the legal materials that are here. So there are a lot of very rare legal materials. Colorado's only got 2 law schools. It's only got a couple of court libraries. It doesn't have local court libraries at all. So there are not a lot of places to do legal research in Colorado, and it's a big state. So making things available online is huge, and it's been a huge part of what we've tried to do here. So we have, and when I say, I mean, all I do, you know, I don't do this, I just sort of help make it happen. I promote it, I guess that's a good thing to say.
Well, being the manager.
Yes, and so we have, for example, digitized the laws of Colorado, starting from the territorial laws, and we stopped originally in, I think, 92, which is when the state took over digitizing the session laws, but they have not made them searchable in the same way that we have. So we have continued that process of trying to get up to current years, because you can, in fact, on our website, search by probably 15 different parameters as well as keyword searching. Now we are digitizing the state and Senate journals and linking those to the session laws. So if the session law mentions a bill number, we link to the references in the state journals to those bill numbers. And that'll be out in a couple of months. The sample for that is done. And we just want to keep going, because the session laws were only available in 2 libraries in Colorado. The journals, as far as I know, are only available in 2 libraries in Colorado. That's not very good access.
Well, not by today's standards.
No.
But, you know, in the old days, that was what you had.
But, well, like I said, you know, some states do have libraries for local courts, which helps that problem a little bit, but we don't. And so making that material accessible is a huge, huge important thing for me. And I see that sort of going into the future. And now I think we're becoming more international. And so that's a new impetus and new place to grow with the law school. But I don't think there's ever any end to the good projects you can do.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like the law school is viable and growing and changing and evolving, and the library needs to follow all those changes.
Yeah, and you have new deans and they have new priorities, and so you have to change your priorities as well.
Including the one
you're here
breaking
for those
in the
people.
new dean periodically. Taming them, I
I think our dean was pretty library friendly when he got here.
That's important, because you occasionally get one that you have to sort of educate.
Yeah.
Hopefully can.
There's always education about what libraries do.
Yeah.
It's easy to see the teaching. It isn't easy to see the value of what a lot of the other people do in a library, and I think that's an important part of a director's role, is trying to make that visible. You know, whenever we're asked, when somebody says, oh, could you just digitize this and put it up for me, right? We send them our page of the 10 things you have to do to every document in order to actually make it accessible on the internet and searchable. I haven't
thought about all 10 of them.
Nobody does. For them, it's just magic, right? So you get a document and you run it through the scanner.
Today's generation of students especially, I mean, they've never lived without computers in their lives and all the wonderful things that can be done with
That's true, but they're not always that curious about how things work.
That's right. They just turn it on, and if it's there, it's fine. They didn't give it any further thought. Well, that's interesting. Now, so this is part of, I put it under sort of the overall topic of publication. I mean, you and the library are doing this. But it's a type of publication, but you've done some other scholarship.
So librarians here are faculty, and so for them a part of their job is publishing. A large part of my job is publishing, and there has been a history here for many decades of librarians actually having a pretty significant publication profile. So I needed a publication profile, I think, to even sort of get interviewed for the job, and that's where some of my mentors come in.
I was going to at some point ask, why don't we do it now?
Yeah, so
do you have any particular
mentors?
mentors?
So one of them, of course, would be Mary Statz, who got me into this in the first place. It really is due to her encouragement that I became a law librarian at all. Yeah. The second one would actually be Frank Hodek.
Oh, okay.
Because, as a trial lawyer, you basically write every day. That you do research and writing. You may not do that much research when you get to the 17-year point, but you do some.
Yeah, I mean, you have juniors that probably...
Right. Or you just are in a new area and you need to look something up. But, so I was used to writing. I wrote in library school, and one of my teachers encouraged me to publish the article that I had written. And I did, and that was great. But then 9/11 happened, and there was an article in the Law Library Journal by a librarian whose name I unfortunately cannot remember. But it was really about why the USA Patriot Act was really not that bad for libraries. Looking at it in the framework of existing law. It was quite a scholarly article and very good, but I disagreed with it. And at one of my very early AA, double Ls, I met Frank and I told him that. And he said, well, write a rebuttal.
Oh, that's the old editor of the Law Library Journal himself talking to you.
Yeah.
He was probably out of office
really?
at that point.
Really? I could
he
write
had old memories of how
I could write a rebuttal? He's like, yeah, write a rebuttal. If it's good, we'll publish it. So he really got me started. He published my first article. He encouraged me to write more articles. He was incredibly supportive. He's a great editor.
Oh yeah. I've seen some of the results on stuff I did for him.
Yeah, I mean he was really good. So that got me started going down that path, and it wasn't that hard if you're used to writing all the time. So I just kept writing. It was definitely a time when it was easy to find things to be interested in. The intersection between librarianship and law was very much in the forefront then. It was librarians who were passionately vocal against the Patriot Act. something I think may not have been actually the very best thing. It would have been better to have been a broader group of people who were against it, and at the very end, the small business association started saying, hey, you know, this isn't really a good idea, is it? But it sort of became a library issue, and I think it would have been better possibly as a broader issue. Yeah. But there were a lot of things to write about, and so I just kept doing it.
I suppose many of us in libraries at the time were concerned about the old days when there was so much censorship and so on, and libraries having certain so-called types of titles that others thought inappropriate suffer a lot.
So law libraries, I don't think ever did a lot of
we didn't
censorship.
have a lot of that,
yeah.
but we do talk to our other colleagues.
Yeah.
And I think some of the concerns about the government snooping, which would be the one way of putting it, probably shows prejudice in putting it that way, but could be misused.
Definitely. Let's just say has been misused.
Well, that's right. And yet the Patriot Act itself has, I don't know that it's really impacted too many of us yet in libraries.
Well, it has. There have been several lawsuits about library-related entities. So one was the Connecticut Consortium that did the back-end work for a whole group of public libraries in Connecticut. And then the Internet Archive, of course, got served with a national security letter, and they see themselves as a library. So that's how they responded to that.
So there have been some problems that have developed then.
Yeah. And then the third person would have definitely to be Barbara Binliff. Yeah. So Barbara started the Boulder Conference on Legal Information in, I want to say, 2009. And the focus of those early Boulder conferences was on legal research pedagogy. And she rightly felt that there was not enough theoretical underpinnings for the writings that law librarians did about teaching, and that the people who taught legal writing had sort of taken over that role, and they had all these theories about how to teach, and we were much more writing, this is how I taught my class articles.
Yeah.
And so she wanted some serious theoretical work about teaching legal research, and convened the first Boulder Conference. And my director said, well, this sounds like something you might be interested in going to. And so I wrote off, and the answer was, well, yeah, that's great, but you have to have an article. So I thought, okay, I have to write something about legal research pedagogy. And so I wrote.
It can't be how I taught it well.
Yeah, exactly. So
Harvard with the kibosh on
exactly.
that.
So I started writing about the thing that actually had really interested me in library school, and I thought, well, there's just no way to work this into my daily librarian life, right? And that is the sort of the human-computer interaction, how we interact with computers. What's going on in the background? Is it helpful? Is it not helpful? And I did a draft of one of the first papers I did about digests and citators. And that launched me on my, I am definitely a search nerd part of my career. And it led to this job because Barbara nominated me for this job.
She's your predecessor.
Yeah, she's my predecessor.
You know who another predecessor, I suppose there are a few in between, who was also Barbara's predecessor where she is now, Texas?
Roy Mirsky, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
He came down here,
he was here briefly, I think.
Yeah, he started his career actually at Yale. And then he moved to the State Law Library in Olympia, Washington for a while, and then he came here from there and then down to Texas where he finished out his career.
A stellar career.
It really was.
Yeah, a stellar career.
Yeah, so you never know. He's sitting in his office.
You never know, exactly.
What might happen.
So, yeah, so that started me down what I call the second prong of my research. One is sort of the advocacy, activist, sort of, you know, what's wrong with the world right now part of it. And then the other part of it is the way we do legal research and how we interact with the tools that we use. Which, if you know anything about tools, you know that you and your tools become one.
So I understand. You know, the scary thing is I've been basically retired for 15 years now, and could I step back into a role like yours and do a proper job after that gap with all the changes? I don't think so.
I don't know. I can't.
You're being polite. How about you do know? There's been a lot of change.
A lot of things have changed.
Yeah.
Definitely. A lot of things have changed.
But I think your involvement with in broadening the scope of the responsibilities of the librarians themselves is very good, in getting them involved in teaching and through the tenure or review process, whatever it is. As faculty members, the same thing, and moving out from behind the circulation desks or that syndrome.
So I think librarians at Hastings were, I can never remember the correct legal term, we were some kind of staff.
Probably academic staff.
Academic
or
staff,
like
or
we
we had
mean very much one or the other.
So we weren't, in fact, any kind of faculty. We weren't instructors, or and that's how I got a assignment as an adjunct faculty, because actually I wasn't a faculty member there.
That's right.
And so I actually didn't know that much about how law schools worked when I got here, never having really been involved.
That's right. You were in the real world, as they say.
Well, not just from being a lawyer, but I didn't learn a lot at Hastings about how law schools worked, because librarians were not included. And so that's just how it was run. What do you know? I mean, that was my job. I really enjoyed my job. I had a wonderful job at Hastings. But when I got here, things were different, and I believe better for the librarians who work here.
Well, one characteristic of Hastings, at least years ago, was that they tended to become a place where faculty members of some renown at other schools had bumped up against the 65 or 70-year mandatory retirement, but they had plenty more they wanted to do, and they would end up there on the faculty. I suppose that model has... By
the time I got there, that model was gone. They had a 65 Club room that was full of wonderful artifacts and books from the members of the 65 Club, but the rules had changed. Now they can't kick you out when you're 65 anymore. That's age discrimination.
Exactly. Well,
it's a good thing, too.
Well, if you get to 75 and you still want to keep teaching, you think it's a pretty good thing. Hopefully your students and the dean do, too, because you're not getting senility or
Exactly. Well, we hope.
Yeah, that's always one of the potential downsides, although there's supposed to be ways to deal with that, too.
I'm sure there are. I think you can ask people to leave.
Now, you have not just sat here in the library expanding the role of the library with the faculty and so on and doing some publication. You've also been involved professionally in service to the associations.
Part of my job.
Well, even Lexis and Nexus, you were on one of their boards.
Yes, I was. It was a really interesting board. It was when they were creating Lexis Advance, and I will only, I mean, this is not that positive, but they just didn't listen to a thing we said.
That's too bad, because you're there at the table and they probably would learn things that would be helpful to them.
I think the marketing people had the upper hand in that rollout. They were just really interested in catching up with Westlaw, and so there were really great people. It was law librarians, it was legal writing faculty, it was deans, it was people, just professors who were interested in research. It's a really wide variety of people who use those databases and gave what I thought was very good advice about what things needed to be there before they rolled it out and how it should sort of work. And they disbanded that group.
Well, I guess they didn't like what they were hearing.
I don't think they did.
Rather than listen carefully and take the good.
So they
took a different approach.
Yeah, they disbanded it.
Yeah, but you've been involved in the Association of American Law Schools, the Society of American Law School Libraries Directors. Now that's relatively new that you all put together.
I think it predates my time as a librarian. I think the academic library directors felt it would be nice to have a forum where they could just talk to each other.
Yeah.
And it is interesting.
They have a fancy name for it now.
Yeah. Solved. I never know what to say.
Yeah.
And I think it's a great group. As a group, for example, we just wrote a letter to the ABA on the they were thinking of changing the requirement that law libraries have a written evaluation of the work that they were doing for the law school in the new ABA standards to take out written. And it was the general feeling of everyone at the library director level that was not a good idea, that the rule doesn't say what kind of evaluation that you do, but to not have some tangible product to look at would further marginalize libraries.
Well, it would seem to make it pretty easy to kind of be slipshod.
Yeah. And
right.
There are a multitude of ways that you can satisfy that requirement.
Well, I know the libraries now, I'm told, no longer report on the annual questionnaire like we did for so long of the ABA.
No, and that's why...
but there's still library members of the teams, or some of the teams?
Yes, there is. So we had ours in 2015, and there is a library member of the team, and they still want to know things, but the reporting on is moved to you know what All-Star is? Yeah. Yeah, it's moved basically to All-Star and become something that you can participate in. Although I think it's really valuable to participate in it, it's not mandatory. And if you're an academic library that's involved in a university, which is not all of them, then you still have ACRL reporting to do. And of course we still have U.S. News and World Report reporting to do.
Well, you're all vying for that.
Yeah.
Although I don't know how much emphasis on the library they really give. They didn't in my days much.
Yeah.
They were looking at job placement and LSAT.
It's like one tiny question.
So the starting and the ending.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that.
And those are still two very important metrics.
Well, you know, how hard it is to get in and what happens after you leave is important to people.
You bet. Costs a lot of money now to get a law degree.
Now you mentioned early at some point along the way in our session that you appreciated the fact that this law school was part of a broader university than, say, Hastings, which was more standalone. And you've talked about the librarians, including yourself, being faculty and involved in faculty sorts of things, which I assume also includes governance in some fashion.
Only for me.
Only for you?
Yeah, only for me.
So your others are not on campus committees or
no, that isn't
law school committees, or are they?
So I was
that's
thinking
how governance happens.
Yeah, I was thinking of law school. So they are in committees. They don't vote.
Okay.
So that's what I took your question to mean.
Okay.
No, they are in fact on committees, both law school committees and university committees.
That's good.
And so am I. That's a very large part of my job.
Yeah. That was part of what I did in my role. My colleagues in the law school were most pleased to have me represent them on things like the University Senate.
So I've been on the Boulder faculty assembly as a member at large. I'm not on it right now. I've been on lots of different university committees.
I always found that wonderful because I get to know people all over the campus.
Well, that's the really good thing about it. And then I've been able to work with people that I meet, right? Because you meet them and then they're like,
something
oh.
my faculty colleagues in the law school never quite figured out is an awful lot of factors very important to them, like where the raises were going to be this next year, and benefits, academic policies, all had to go through some of those bodies I was part of.
Mm-hmm. Well, they know that, I think.
Well, they do, but they didn't know it well enough to want to volunteer to take
well,
over for a while.
That's true.
But I shouldn't play it down. But it was an interesting work for me too.
It's
Sounds
super,
like it is for
super.
you.
It's super interesting.
Yeah. Well, let's see. I'm looking at my notes here very quickly because we're sort of getting towards the end of the of our conversation. I want to notice, specifically notice that you twice have received the Law Library Journal Article of the Year Award.
Which I'm
Was
very...
one of those having to do with the Patriot Act?
Yeah. So one was the Patriot Act, and one was privacy in more generally.
Okay. So that was
I have those upstairs. They're
2004 and 2006.
Yeah, they're on my wall. So far, as far as I know, I'm the only person to have managed to do that.
Yeah, I don't know anybody who's gotten it twice. It's not too easy to get that even once.
So I'm pretty proud of that.
Yeah, well, it should be. It's well deserved. I was on the awards committee. We didn't deal with that award, but it's very competitive.
It's very competitive.
Very difficult to select from many very excellent applications who should be designated for whatever.
And the plaques are so nice. They look good on my wall.
Well, they do. The dean comes in, sees them, he's impressed.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Hopefully.
Yeah. Well, we sort of are nearing the end of our conversation this afternoon, Susan, but before we do, it's customary to ask if there's anything we've not talked about that you would like to mention. And I do have one thing before you do that, and I didn't ask earlier, we sort of moved past it, and that is whether you have any hobbies or special passions that occupy time.
Oh yeah, we missed that question.
We did.
Well, of course I do.
I figured.
Yeah, so well, one of the things I did as a young person was own a restaurant.
You
And
mentioned
that love of food and wine has not gone. So we're still, my husband and I are still big foodies. And he doesn't really make wine. He sort of nurtures wine in California. So he's still out there dealing with the wine, which we don't sell, but we enjoy.
Well, why not? I mean, that's that's the big pleasure.
Exactly.
Bringing it yourself.
And I like crafts.
Yeah.
I like to knit. I make jewelry. I always think about learning something new, but then I don't have time. But I do like them. And so, in terms of something I haven't talked about, I think one of the questions you asked was whether or not I thought publication was important to librarianship. And it's a conversation I have with a lot of people, and it's a conversation I actually know has happened at AALL on a relatively high level. I know there is a contingent of people who feel that Law Library Journal is not for everyone, and that these articles are not that helpful to many of the people who are practicing. And so I do feel it's important, and there are several reasons why I do. First of all, we're a profession. And you can't be a profession without a professional outlet.
That's right.
The second reason is even more blunt. One of the things that I think all librarians would be united about would be the need to get more legal research training to everyone who passes through law school. At this point, it's a required outcome for the ABA, and yet I doubt very much there are few schools that require both first-year legal research and some advanced legal research. It is so much the exception. And this kind of goes back to starting the Boulder Conference. If you want to convince law faculty that there is a reason why you should have more legal research, you have to do so in the terms that law faculty understand. And that means that you need a scholarship that you can point to. So when I started here and I started talking to some of the faculty that I was meeting about legal research, somebody asked me, well, are there 4 or 5 articles that you could recommend on legal research pedagogy that I should read to bring me up to speed? And I was like, yes. There are actually now 4 or 5 articles I would be delighted to recommend to you that you will be thrilled to read, that will be interesting to you. And that would not have been true possibly 5 years before then, right? We need to have a way of talking about what we do that resonates with the academy, so that we can have influence in the academy. And that will trickle down to the firms where these lawyers work. So in terms of, maybe you don't want to read this article, but definitely it has a benefit to you further down the line. The other reason is that everybody doesn't need to be writing sort of law review length articles that are steeped in theory. There's a place for that, but there is also a serious place for the kind of articles that we all need when it's time to make a change. If we don't write articles about what we're doing in law libraries, we're going to have to depend on other academic libraries as the only possible place we could find information on what it means to work with a particular ILS, or how it is that, you know, embedding librarians in clinics works, or that's valuable information. You don't want to be working in a vacuum, everybody reinventing the wheel. So writing for bar journals, for things like Spectrum, for ABA Journal, for all of those places, short pieces, it's really important for everyone in the profession to have that. So who's going to do it? It has to be us.
That's right.
It has to be law librarians. So I think we need all of it. I don't expect everyone who works with me to write 40 or 50-page articles about anything.
Or even perhaps have the time to read them, and just, unless it was one really specific to their needs.
So, well, we do actually, we meet regularly to discuss some article of interest to someone. So we try and keep up on what's happening. I think that's actually part of my job too, is to know what's going on out there.
You know, it's interesting, during the years I was active, I had limited time, and I would glance through the journal and read a few pieces, but not a lot, frankly. And then after retirement, I had more time, and I would get it and I'd read it, and several of the people who are part of this oral history would perhaps not have been selected for that had I not run into an article that they just written that was very impressive.
So I actually think it is part of my job not to read every 50 to 80 page article that comes out, because that's kind of hard. But I subscribe to lots of listservs and lots of RSS feeds for things that are interesting and are going on in the library world. I think I'm the person that faculty are most likely to ask a question about the law library world, and I feel like I should know the answer about pretty much everything.
Well, you're their in-house expert on law library.
Exactly.
I mean, that's automatic. It goes with the turf of being the head of the
So
library.
I spend a lot of my time reading.
Yeah. Well, that's part of your role too, because you are needing to set the directions.
And I need to know where things are going and where the pain points are.
That's
and
right.
It isn't that hard to find out. In fact, it's, you know, there is a lot of relatively easily read short, accessible articles about things that are going on in the law library world. I read lots of blogs.
Well, I was really disappointed, but I understand the economics when they dropped the print publication of the Law Library Journal. Although it's available for if you pay a separate.
I pay the
fee.
separate
Yeah.
fee. I
I
think it's
haven't
important
gone
to
that
have.
far. I read it on Hine Online.
Yeah, I think
Or
it's,
a couple of times I've done something that's gotten in there, and then I get a paper copy as a freebie.
yeah. No, we still subscribe to it. It's our journal.
Yeah, it really is.
So we definitely subscribe to it.
You know, it's interesting too because it is truly the history of our profession. And going back and looking at minutes of meetings and articles back into the 20s and 30s of the last century.
It's really fun.
It's fascinating to see what the issues were. And
Actually, the article that we're reading for our review this month is it's called something like, "What are the attributes of a good law librarian?" And it was written in 1935
all right,
at DU. So we're going to look at that and see how things have changed.
Well, right about that era, one of the big things that the American Bar Association, ALL, and I don't know who else, but other nearby associations, they were so concerned with the increasing cost to lawyers of maintaining law libraries because West, had their model of publishing all the cases they could get their hands on, it seemed, and charging accordingly.
Shall I say appendix?
And they were trying to figure out if they could somehow slow that down, but it certainly didn't happen.
It didn't happen.
And that was in the late 30s. It was sort of
So that's part of the history that I draw on when I talk about legal research. This feeling from the very beginning of time, basically, that there were just too many cases.
Yeah.
And I actually counted the number of cases in some of the early reporters, and they were like, I'm making this up now because I don't remember, but let's say there were 25,000. And now there are 14 million.
Oh yeah, it's unbelievable.
So how to find them has always been the holy grail.
Yeah. The indexes, that's most of our libraries these days, is how to get into what the law is.
It's still true.
Yeah.
I mean, the indexes are just online, but they're there.
But
they're doing the work
indexes,
for you.
They do the job that you
Yeah,
need.
they're working back there.
Yeah. Well, maybe on that note, Susan, I should thank you for taking your time and inviting me here and talking to me on camera for the oral history of law librarianship.
Well, thank you so much for making me a part of it. It's really a pleasure.
Well, I not only thank you on my own behalf, I'm the guy that got to come, and that's the fun part, but Frank Hodek, Michelle Wu, and Dick Spinelli, our colleagues, work with me, and I have all along on this oral history and for the Hine Online database. Thank you.
Thank you.